5 women tried to tame the beast of Blackridge Mountain. 5 women failed. Now the most unlikely bride of all was about to step off the stagecoach, a woman the world had thrown away, just like him. What happened next would prove that the most dangerous thing in these mountains wasn't the wilderness. It was 2 broken people who refused to break again. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach driver wouldn't take Garrick Stone's money. Not directly, anyway. He'd leave it on the seat when Garrick turned away, or tuck it under a rock by the trading post, anywhere that didn't require him to touch the big man's hand. It had been that way for 3 years now, ever since Garrick had started this fool's errand of ordering brides like supplies from a catalog. "Got another letter for you," the driver said, his eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. He was young, new to the route, still had that skittish energy of someone who'd heard the stories but hadn't yet decided if they were true. Garrick took the envelope without a word. His hands were massive, scarred across the knuckles from 1,000 small violences, split wood, sharp stone, the occasional disagreement with a man who thought size meant stupid. The envelope looked like a child's toy between his fingers. "That makes 6, the driver added, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. Garrick's jaw tightened. The kid was right, though. 6 letters, 6 women, 5 failures. He turned without acknowledging the comment and walked back toward his horse. The animal, a gray gelding with patience beyond reason, didn't flinch when Garrick mounted. Most horses did, at first. Something about the way he moved, all coiled strength and barely controlled power, set them dancing. But Duke had been with him for 7 years. They'd reached an understanding. The ride back to the cabin took 2 hours, climbing through switchbacks that would have terrified anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. Garrick didn't notice. He'd made this journey so many times that Duke could probably do it alone. His mind was elsewhere, turning over the weight of that envelope in his saddlebag. 6 letters. The first had come 4 years ago, shortly after his father died and left him the mountain. Thomas Stone had been a hard man, made harder by the wilderness, and he'd raised his son accordingly. "Sentiment's a luxury," he'd say, usually while resetting a broken bone or stitching a gash. "Can't afford luxuries out here." Garrick had believed him, had lived by that code. And then one day he'd looked around the cabin, the same cabin his father had built, where his father had died alone, and realized he was walking the exact same path. 42 years old, no wife, no children, nothing but stone and timber and silence. So he'd done what desperate men do. He'd placed an advertisement, wanted, wife for frontier life. Must be strong, capable, unafraid of isolation. Comfort provided, but not luxury. Hardship guaranteed. He'd thought honesty would help. Had actually believed that laying out the brutality of the life might attract someone suited for it. The first woman had lasted 3 days. Catherine. Pretty name. Pretty woman, too, in that delicate way that belonged in parlors and tea rooms. She'd stepped off the stagecoach wearing a traveling dress that probably cost more than Garrick made in a month of trapping. Her eyes had gone wide when she saw him, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of dawning horror that she'd made a terrible mistake. "Mr. Stone?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Call me Garrick." Yes. Of course. The ride to the cabin had been torture. She'd gripped the saddle so hard her knuckles went white, and every time Duke shifted she made a small sound of distress. When they finally arrived and she saw the cabin, solid, functional, completely devoid of anything decorative, something in her face just collapsed. She'd tried. He'd give her that. For 3 days she'd moved around the cabin like a ghost, touching things uncertainly, starting tasks she didn't know how to finish. On the 3rd night she'd broken down crying at the dinner table. "I can't," she'd sobbed. "I'm sorry, I thought I could, but I can't. This place is, I just can't." Garrick had taken her back to town the next morning. Hadn't argued, hadn't tried to convince her. What would have been the point? The second woman had been different. Margaret, older, weathered by her own hard life. She'd looked at the cabin with approval and at Garrick with calculation. "You'll do," she'd said simply. And for 2 weeks, it had almost worked. She cooked efficiently, kept the cabin organized, didn't flinch when he came in covered in blood from dressing a deer. But she was cold. ran the household like a military operation, spoke to him in clipped sentences that expected obedience rather than conversation. One night he'd made the mistake of trying to talk to her. Really talk, not just exchange information about supplies or weather. He'd asked about her life before, what had brought her to answer his advertisement. "That's not relevant," she'd said, her voice flat. "We have an arrangement. I keep your house. You provide. The past doesn't enter into it." She'd left a week later. No dramatic exit, no tears, just a note on the table one morning. "This isn't what I need." 3, 4, and 5 had blurred together in Garrick's memory. Different faces, different reasons for leaving, but the same basic story. He was too much, too big, too quiet, too rough around the edges. The cabin was too isolated. The life was too hard. He was impossible to understand, impossible to live with, impossible to love. By the time winter had locked him in last year, alone except for Duke and the wind howling through the peaks, Garrick had accepted it. Some men weren't built for partnership. Some men were meant to live and die alone, like his father, like his grandfather before him. The stone men and their stone mountain, hard and solitary. He'd stopped checking the mail. But the matchmaking service had apparently not stopped trying. Letters kept coming, forwarded through the trading post, each one from some new desperate woman who hadn't yet heard the stories about the beast of Blackridge Mountain. He'd burned the last 2 without opening them. Now, sitting in his cabin as the afternoon light slanted through the window, Garrick stared at the 6th envelope. Part of him wanted to throw it in the stove with the others, save everyone the trouble. But there was something about it. The handwriting was different, bold, a little messy, like it had been written in a hurry. No flourishes, no attempts at making it pretty, just clear, functional script. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The letter inside was short, refreshingly short. Most of the women had written pages about themselves, their virtues, their skills, their hopes and dreams. This was barely a page, and half of that was blank space. "Mr. Stone, my name is Mei Lin. I'm writing because your advertisement is the first honest thing I've read in 2 years of looking. I'm not delicate. I'm not small. I'm not what anyone would call traditionally desirable. I'm strong enough to work a full day without complaint, smart enough to solve problems without supervision, and stubborn enough to have survived 34 years in a world that would have preferred I didn't. I don't need rescue. I don't need romance. I don't need someone to complete me or make me whole. I'm already whole. What I need is a place where being large and capable and unwilling to soften myself is an asset instead of a liability. Your advertisement suggests you might need the same thing. I can cook, preserve food, manage livestock, repair most household items, and shoot well enough to hit what I'm aiming at. I can't sew a straight line to save my life. I have no talent for small talk, and I will not pretend to be less than I am to make anyone comfortable. If you're looking for someone to be grateful for the opportunity to serve you, I'm not your woman. If you're looking for someone who can stand beside you and hold her own weight, write back. Maybe what drives others away is exactly what I've been searching for." Malin Garrick read it 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair, the letter still in his hand, and let out a sound that might have been a laugh if he remembered how. The woman had called him honest, had recognized the advertisement for what it was, not a plea, but a filter. She hadn't promised to try, hadn't claimed she could change, hadn't offered any of the hopeful bullshit the others had wrapped themselves in. She just stated facts. And that last line had reached through the paper and grabbed him by the throat. Maybe what drives others away is exactly what I've been searching for. He looked around the cabin, saw it the way the others must have seen it, rough, spare, built for function over beauty. One main room with a stone fireplace taking up most of the far wall. A kitchen area with a cast iron stove, shelves of preserved goods, hooks for pots and utensils. A sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. No decorations except a single photograph of his parents on the mantel, their faces as severe as the mountain behind them. It was too much for some people. The isolation, the silence, the constant presence of the wilderness just outside the door. But for someone who'd spent their whole life being too much themselves. Garrick stood, moving to the small desk by the window. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil, then paused. What the hell did you say to a woman like that? Someone who'd stripped away all pretense and laid her cards on the table? He wrote one word. Come. Then he added the date he'd be in town to meet the stagecoach, folded the paper, and sealed it in an envelope before he could second-guess himself. 3 weeks later, Garrick stood outside the trading post, watching the road. The stagecoach was late. Not unusual. The route was long and unpredictable, especially this time of year when spring runoff could wash out sections of road overnight. But it meant he'd been standing here for an hour, acutely aware of the way people gave him a wide berth. The trading post owner, Samuel, had tried to make conversation when Garrick first arrived. "Heard you got another one coming," Samuel had said, his tone carefully neutral. "Yep." "Well, hope it works out this time." Garrick had just nodded. What else was there to say? "I hope I'm not completely unlovable," seemed like too much information to share with a man who sold beans and ammunition. The sound of wheels and hoofbeats finally reached him. Garrick felt his shoulders tense, that familiar dread settling into his gut. This was the moment when it usually went wrong, when the woman stepped off the coach, took one look at him, and he could see in her eyes that she was already calculating her escape. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver hopped down, opened the door, and extended his hand. A woman's hand emerged first, large, sun-browned, with short nails and visible calluses. Not the soft, pale hand of someone who'd spent their life being decorative, then the rest of her. Maylin was not small. She stood at least 5'10", maybe more, with broad shoulders and a solid build that spoke of a lifetime of physical work. Her face was round, practical, framed by black hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore a traveling dress that had been repaired multiple times, practical boots, and carried a single worn bag. She looked at Garrick without flinching. "Mr. Stone?" Her voice was low, steady, with an accent that suggested she'd learned English as a second language but had long since mastered it. "Garrick," he said. She nodded. "May." They stood there for a moment, sizing each other up. Garrick was aware of Samuel watching from the trading post window, of the handful of townspeople who'd found excuses to loiter nearby. Everyone wanted to see how this one would play out. "This the only bag?" Garrick asked. "I travel light." He took it from her. It was heavier than it looked, and tied it to Duke's saddle. Then he turned back to find May studying the horse with the same calm assessment she'd given him. "You ride?" he asked. "Enough not to fall off." "Good enough." He mounted, then extended his hand to help her up behind him. She took it without hesitation, her grip strong and sure, and swung herself up with practiced ease. Her hand settled at his waist, firm but not clinging. "It's 2 hours to the cabin," Garrick said. "Rough terrain." "I read your advertisement," May replied. "I know what I signed up for." Something in Garrick's chest loosened, just slightly. He clicked his tongue and Duke started moving, carrying them away from town and up into the mountains. They didn't talk during the ride. Garrick had expected that to be uncomfortable. Most women felt compelled to fill silence with chatter, as if quiet was something to be feared. But May seemed content to observe, her breathing steady, her grip adjusting naturally to Duke's gait. When they reached the first serious climb, where the path narrowed and dropped away sharply on one side, Garrick felt her shift slightly to help with balance rather than freezing up in fear. Good instincts. The cabin came into view just as the sun was starting to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It looked better in this light. The rough timber softened, the stone chimneys solid and reassuring against the darkening sky. Garrick dismounted and helped May down. She landed lightly, immediately turning to survey the property. He watched her face, waiting for the disappointment, the fear, the realization that she'd made a mistake. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Defensible," she said. "Good water access from that stream. Root cellar? East side. Smokehouse? Needs repair. Most things do." She picked up her bag. "Show me inside?" Garrick led her to the cabin, suddenly hyper-aware of every rough edge, every imperfection. The door stuck a little, needed to be planed down. The main room was cold. He hadn't bothered lighting a fire before leaving. The loft was a mess of furs and blankets that he hadn't sorted properly. May stepped inside and set her bag down. Then she walked the space methodically, looking at everything. The stove, the shelves, the fireplace, the ladder to the loft. She opened the cabinet where he kept preserved goods, ran a hand along the chimney stones, tested the pump at the sink. "You built this?" she asked. "My father. I've made repairs." "It's good work." She turned to face him. Where do you want me to sleep? The question caught him off guard. The other women had either assumed the loft or demanded separate quarters. May was just asking for information. Loft's mine, he said. But there's space down here. I can build a partition. Not necessary. May was already moving, pulling furs from a storage chest, assessing the corner near the stove. This will be warmer anyway. I'll set up here. She worked quickly, efficiently, arranging a sleeping space that was functional and private enough without walling herself off. Garrick found himself just standing there, uncertain what to do. You have food? May asked, not looking up from her work. Yeah, jerky, beans, some... Show me. He showed her the stores. Her expression didn't change much, but he caught a slight tightening around her eyes when she saw how low some of the supplies were running. You've been eating like a bachelor, she said. I am a bachelor. Not anymore. She pulled out a few items, examining them. At least, not if this works. We'll need to stretch these until we can hunt properly. When's the last time you had vegetables that weren't pickled? Can't remember. May made a sound that wasn't quite disapproval, but close. Tomorrow, I'll check what you've got for a garden. Tonight, we eat what's available. You hunt? When needed. Good. I'll need fresh meat for some of what I'm planning. She was already moving around the kitchen like she'd been doing it for years, finding utensils, testing the stove temperature with her hand. Light the fire. This place is cold enough to store meat. Garrick found himself moving to obey before he'd even processed the command. By the time he had a fire going, May had sorted through his meager supplies and was setting up to cook. He watched her work. There was no wasted movement, no uncertainty. She handled the ingredients with respect but not reverence, clearly used to making something out of nothing. Within 30 minutes, the cabin was filled with smells he didn't recognize, spices he didn't stock, techniques he'd never learned. Sit, May said, pointing to the table. Garrick sat. She brought 2 plates of food and set one in front of him. It was simple. Beans cooked with the jerky, seasoned in ways that made them taste like an entirely different meal. Flatbread she'd somehow made with his basic supplies. A small portion of pickled vegetables that she'd transformed with heat and timing into something that wasn't quite fresh but wasn't quite preserved either. He took a bite, then another, then realized he was eating like a starving man and forced himself to slow down. Good? May asked. She wasn't looking for compliments, just data. Yeah. She nodded and returned to her own plate. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was the comfortable quiet of 2 people too hungry and too practical to waste time talking. When they finished, May collected the plates and began washing them. Garrick stood to help, and she didn't protest, just made room at the basin. They worked side by side, falling into a rhythm that shouldn't have been possible for 2 people who'd met hours ago. Questions? May asked as she dried the last plate. Plenty. Ask. Garrick dried his hands, considering. There were 1,000 things he wanted to know, but most of them felt too personal, too intrusive. Instead, he asked the practical question. Why'd you really answer the advertisement? May set the plate on the shelf and turned to face him. In the firelight, her face was all planes and angles, strong and uncompromising. Because I'm tired, she said simply. Tired of making myself smaller. Tired of pretending I want things I don't. Tired of men who want a decoration or a servant or a child to manage instead of a partner. She crossed her arms. Your advertisement didn't promise easy, didn't promise comfort, didn't promise anything except honesty and hard work. That's more than most men offer. Could have stayed where you were. Could have, but I didn't fit there, never did. She met his eyes directly. I'm guessing you understand something about not fitting. Garrick felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly relieving. Yeah, so here we are, 2 people who don't fit anywhere else, trying to figure out if we fit together. May uncrossed her arms. I'll tell you now, I'm not easy to live with. I'm blunt. I don't do well with dishonesty or games. I need space to think and work. I don't perform femininity well, and I'm not going to start. Okay. Okay? She looked skeptical. Just like that? You think I'm easy to live with? Garrick gestured around the cabin. 5 women have already proven I'm not. So yeah, okay. You're blunt and need space. I'm quiet and probably too rough. We'll figure it out or we won't. Something shifted in May's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Practical, she said. I can work with practical. Got another question, Garrick said. Go ahead. The letter. That last line. About what drives others away. He struggled to find the words. Did you mean that? May was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. I spent my whole life being told I was too much. Too big, too loud, too independent, too unwilling to defer. Men wanted women who made them feel bigger by being smaller. I can't be that. Won't be that. She looked at the fire. Your advertisement suggested you didn't want that either, that maybe you needed someone who could match you instead of shrinking away from you. The others left because I was too much, Garrick admitted. Too big, too quiet, too hard to understand. One of them said living here was like living with a mountain, immovable and silent. Mountains are useful, May said. They break the wind, they gather rain, they define the land around them. Being immovable isn't always wrong. Garrick felt something crack open in his chest. Some part of him he'd sealed off after the fifth failure. I'm not going to lie to you, he said carefully. This life is hard. The winters are brutal. We're days from town. The work never stops. And I'm not good at talking, not good at the things men are supposed to do to make women happy. What things? I don't know. Romance. Softness. Saying the right words. May laughed. A short, sharp sound. I don't need romance. I need respect. I need honesty. I need a partner who won't collapse when things get hard. She looked at him directly. Can you give me that? Yes. Then we'll try. She moved toward her sleeping area. Tomorrow we'll figure out the details. Work division, expectations, all of it. Tonight, I'm tired from travel. May. She paused. Thank you for coming. She studied him for a long moment. Thank you for being honest enough to make me want to. Garrick climbed to the loft and lay in his furs, listening to May settle in below. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the cabin didn't feel empty. The next morning, Garrick woke to the smell of coffee. He descended the ladder to find May already dressed and moving around the kitchen. She'd found his coffee grounds and was making it in a way he'd never seen before, boiling it with something that smelled like spices. You're up early, he said. Habit. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. I want to see the property in daylight, see what we're working with. They took their coffee outside. The morning was clear, cold, with that particular quality of mountain light that made everything look sharp and new. Garrick led her around, showing her the stream, the root cellar, the smokehouse that needed work, the area where his father had tried and failed to keep a garden. May asked questions, practical ones, about water flow, about sun exposure, about predators and growing seasons and soil quality. She climbed down into the root cellar and inspected the storage system, made notes about what needed reinforcing. She examined the smokehouse with the eye of someone who'd built or repaired one before. This is salvageable, she said, running her hand along the damaged wall. Needs new stones here, better seal around the door. But the structure's sound. You know masonry? Enough. My father was a builder. I learned basics before. She trailed off, then shook her head. Before. I can do this repair if you can source the stone. There's plenty of stone. She smiled, a real smile this time. Of course there is. We're on a mountain. They worked through the morning, May taking inventory of everything while Garrick handled the basic chores. He split wood while she examined the tool shed, organized the mess of equipment into some kind of system. He tended to Duke while she walked the perimeter of the property, clearly thinking about defense, about approach routes, about how the land could be used. When they broke for lunch, May had a list. We need seeds, she said. Multiple varieties, fast-growing if possible. We need to repair the smokehouse immediately. Hunting season won't wait. We need better storage in the root cellar, and we need to think about expanding it. Your tool situation is acceptable, but we're missing some basics, and we need chickens. Chickens. Eggs, meat, pest control. Chickens are useful. She looked at him. Unless you object? No objection, just haven't had chickens. You'll have chickens now. She consulted her list again. When's the next trip to town? Usually monthly. Went 3 weeks ago. So we have a week. Good. Gives us time to prepare a proper supply list. She set down the list and looked at him directly. I should tell you something. Garrick felt his shoulders tense. Here it came. The change of heart, the realization, the gentle retreat. I'm not here to be saved. May said. I'm not here because I had no other options. I had options. I chose this one. She paused. I chose you, or at least I chose the possibility of you. But I need to know you chose me too, not just any woman who was willing to stay. The honesty of it hit Garrick hard. She was right to ask. The others had felt like attempts to fill a void. Any woman better than no woman. But May, your letter was different, he said slowly. Wasn't asking for anything except honesty. Wasn't promising to try to be something you're not. Just facts. Truth. He met her eyes. I've had 5 women try to live here. None of them saw it like you do, like potential instead of punishment. Is that a yes? Yes, I chose you, or the possibility of you. May nodded, satisfied. Then we understand each other. This is a trial for both of us. We see if it works. If it doesn't, we part ways with honesty and respect. If it does, she gestured around them, we build something. Agreed. They shook hands on it, her grip as firm as his, and Garrick felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. The days developed a rhythm. Garrick handled the heavy work, splitting wood, hauling water, hunting. May took over the domestic operations with the efficiency of a military campaign. She reorganized the entire cabin, creating systems for everything. She cooked meals that transformed his basic supplies into food that actually tasted like something. She repaired his clothes, fixed the sticky door, and began work on the smokehouse. But it wasn't subservience. She gave orders as often as she took them, made decisions without asking permission, claimed space in the cabin like it was her right. When Garrick tried to do something inefficiently, she called him on it. Why are you carrying water that way? She asked one afternoon. What do you mean? You're making 3 trips when 2 would do. Use the bigger buckets. These are the buckets I use. These are the buckets you've always used. Doesn't make them the right ones. She produced 2 larger containers from somewhere. Try these. He did. She was right. He could carry more with less effort. How long have you been doing it the other way? She asked. 20 years? Stubborn mountain man. But there was affection in her voice. They talked while they worked. Not constantly. Both of them valued silence. But enough. May told him about growing up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants, about being larger and stronger than was considered acceptable for a girl, about the constant pressure to be smaller, quieter, more delicate. My mother tried, May said one evening as they worked on the smokehouse together. She wanted me to be like her, soft-spoken, deferential. She'd give me these looks when I spoke too loudly or took up too much space. She positioned a stone carefully. I think it broke her heart that I couldn't be that person. Where is she now? Gone. Both of them, 5 years back. Fever. May's hand stilled for just a moment. After that, I tried to fit into the world they'd wanted for me. Tried to be the quiet, obedient woman men claimed to want. Lasted about a year before I realized I'd rather be alone than be a ghost. Garrick handed her another stone. My father used to say sentiment was a luxury we couldn't afford. Did you believe him? For a long time. Then he died alone in this cabin, and I realized maybe some luxuries are worth the cost. They worked in silence after that, the only sound the scrape of stone on stone and the wind through the pines. On the 10th day, they butchered a deer together. Garrick had shot it at dawn, a clean kill. He'd expected to do the dressing alone while May stayed in the cabin. That's how it had been with the others. The ones who'd stayed long enough to see a kill. They'd turned away from the blood, the viscera, the necessary brutality of turning death into food. Instead, May had appeared with knives and rope. You need help? She asked. You know how to dress a deer? I know how to dress a deer. She did. Worked as efficiently as he did, her cuts clean and sure. They stripped the hide together, sectioned the meat, saved the organs worth saving. Her hands were bloody to the wrists, and she didn't flinch once. You've done this before, Garrick observed. Had to learn. Living alone means learning everything. She began wrapping portions for the smokehouse. You judging? Opposite of judging? She glanced at him, something like satisfaction in her expression. That night, she cooked the heart. Made it tender somehow, paired it with the last of the winter vegetables and fresh bread she'd baked that morning. They ate in their usual, comfortable silence, and when they were done, May leaned back in her chair. This works, she said. Garrick looked up from his plate. What? This. Us. The division of labor, the communication, the space we're finding to be ourselves. She met his eyes. I'm not saying it's perfect. We're still learning each other. But it works. Better than I expected. Yeah. Garrick felt that crack in his chest split wider, letting something warm seep through. Better than I expected, too. So we continue? We continue. May stood, collected the dishes. As she passed his chair, she rested a hand briefly on his shoulder, the first deliberately affectionate touch since she'd arrived. It lasted only a second, but Garrick felt it down to his bones. On the 14th day, they rode to town together. May sat behind him on Duke again, her presence solid and sure. When they reached town, Garrick felt the familiar weight of eyes on them. The whispers had already started, the beast of Blackridge and his latest doomed bride. But May didn't shrink or hide. She walked beside him into the trading post, her head high, and when Samuel gave them both a skeptical look, she just smiled. We need supplies, she said pleasantly. Here's our list. Samuel took it, his eyebrows rising as he read. That's quite extensive. We're building something, May replied. Building requires supplies. They spent 2 hours in town, Garrick handling the heavy items while May negotiated prices and selected goods with a sharp eye. People stared. A few women whispered behind their hands. One man made a comment just loud enough to hear about another one who doesn't know what she's getting into. May turned to face him directly. I know exactly what I'm getting into, she said, her voice carrying across the street. A partnership with a good man and a hard life that's worth living. If you have something to say about it, say it to my face instead of muttering like a coward. The man sputtered and retreated. Garrick felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name, pride maybe, or gratitude, or both. On the ride back, loaded down with supplies, May was quiet. You okay? Garrick asked. Thinking. About? About whether I care what they think. She paused. Decided I don't. Good. Does it bother you, the talk? Used to. Not anymore. Garrick guided Duke around a rough patch. Figure if they're talking about me, they're leaving someone else alone. He felt rather than saw May's smile against his back. That night, as they organized the new supplies, Garrick realized something had shifted. This wasn't a trial anymore. This was a partnership. This was real. May, he said, setting down a sack of flour. I need to tell you something. She straightened, giving him her full attention. I'm not good at this, Garrick said, at knowing what to say or when to say it. But I need you to know that having you here, He struggled. It's the first time this place has felt like a home instead of just a shelter. May was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the space between them and took his hand. Her palm was warm, calloused, solid. For me too, she said softly. First time I felt like I belonged somewhere instead of just occupying space. They stood there, hands clasped, and Garrick felt the last of his defenses crumble. This woman, this strong, blunt, impossible woman, had walked into his life and made everything make sense. Stay, he said. Not a question, a plea. I'm not going anywhere, May replied. Unless you want me to. Never. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Good, because we have chickens to build a coop for, and I'm not doing that alone. Garrick laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that surprised them both. May grinned back at him, and in that moment, standing in the cabin they were slowly making theirs, Garrick Stone realized he was no longer alone. The mountain hadn't changed. He hadn't changed. But everything else? Everything else was different. And for the first time in his life, different meant better. The chicken coop took 3 days to build, and by the end of it, both Garrick and May were covered in sawdust and arguing about structural integrity. The roof pitch is wrong, May said, hands on her hips, studying the frame they'd just erected. It's fine. It'll collect snow. Snow means weight. Weight means collapse. Garrick looked at the angle again. She was right, but admitting it felt like losing ground in some unspoken contest they'd been having since breakfast. We can reinforce it, or we can rebuild it correctly now instead of fixing it later. That's another half day of work. Yes, May picked up the saw. It is. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Garrick grabbed his tools and started dismantling the roof section. May's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're stubborn," she said. "You're bossy." "I prefer decisive." "I prefer stubborn." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the mountain face. They rebuilt the roof with the correct pitch, and when they were done, May stood back with visible satisfaction. "Now it'll last," she said. "Now it'll last," Garrick agreed. The chickens arrived the following week, courtesy of Samuel's wife, who was apparently thrilled someone was finally taking her excess hens. 8 birds in various states of indignation, crammed into crates and clucking their displeasure at the journey. May handled them like she'd been raising poultry her entire life, checking each one for health, assigning them names Garrick knew he'd never remember, settling them into their new home with water and feed. Within 2 days, the chickens had established their pecking order and were producing eggs. "See," May said, presenting the first egg like a trophy. "Useful." "Never said they weren't." "You thought it." She wasn't wrong. Garrick had thought keeping chickens was more trouble than it was worth. One more thing to manage in an already demanding existence. But watching May move through the morning routine, collecting eggs, checking feed, talking to the birds like they were people, he had to admit there was something right about it. Something that made the homestead feel less like a survival outpost and more like a place where people actually lived. Spring was pushing into summer now, the snow line retreating up the mountain, wildflowers emerging in impossible colors. May had gotten her garden started, commandeering the patch of land his father had failed with and transforming it through sheer force of will. She'd spent days breaking up the soil, adding material from the compost heap she'd started, planning the layout with the precision of a military campaign. "Beans here," she'd explained, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "They'll fix nitrogen, then squash to spread and keep weeds down. Corn for height and structure. Tomatoes need the most sun, so south side. Root vegetables where it's cooler." Garrick had just watched her work, fascinated by the way her mind operated. Everything was connected, everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. One morning he found her kneeling in the dirt, talking to herself in Chinese. He'd picked up a few words by now, enough to know when she was pleased or frustrated. But this was different, softer, almost musical. "What are you saying?" he asked. May looked up, dirt smudged across her cheek. "Old saying my grandmother taught me, about plants growing better if you talk to them." "Does it work?" "Don't know, but it doesn't hurt." She patted the soil around a seedling. "And it reminds me of her. She had a garden in the city. Tiny thing, barely 6 plants, but she tended it like it was an estate." "She teach you all this?" "Most of it. The rest I learned by necessity." May stood, brushing off her knees. "After my parents died, I worked on a farm for a while. Owner didn't care that I was a woman as long as I could do the work. Learned a lot there." "Why'd you leave?" Her expression darkened. "Owner's son decided I owed him something for the opportunity. I disagreed. Violently." Garrick felt his jaw tighten. "He hurt you?" "He tried." May met his eyes. "I broke his nose and 2 ribs. Left that night." "Good." She studied him for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. "You mean that?" "Yeah. Most men would be worried about me being too aggressive, too violent. Most men are idiots." Garrick gestured to the garden. "You need help with anything here?" May's shoulders relaxed and she smiled. "Actually, yes. I need posts for the beans to climb, tall ones." They worked together through the morning, Garrick cutting saplings to length while May positioned them. The physical labor was comfortable, familiar. They developed a rhythm over the past weeks, an unspoken understanding of how to move around each other, when to help and when to step back. Around midday, clouds started building over the peaks. Garrick recognized the pattern. Afternoon storms were common this time of year, violent but brief. They had maybe an hour before it hit. "We should head in," he said. May looked at the sky and nodded. They'd just reached the cabin when the first drops fell, fat and cold. Within minutes, it was a deluge, rain hammering the roof, wind driving it sideways against the windows. Inside, May went to check the damper on the stove while Garrick secured the shutters. The cabin darkened, lit only by the fire and the occasional flash of lightning. Thunder rolled across the mountains, deep enough to feel in your chest. "Big one," May observed, setting water to boil for tea. "They usually are, up here," She brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from him. In the firelight, her face was all shadows and angles, strong and uncompromising as always. But there was something else there too, something softer that hadn't been present when she first arrived. "Can I ask you something?" May said. "Yeah." "Why did you really want a wife? And don't say companionship or help with the work. You managed alone for years." Garrick wrapped his hands around the warm cup, considering. No one had asked him directly before. The other women had assumed they knew. Loneliness, necessity, social expectation. None of them had been quite right. "My father died in this cabin," he said finally. "Took 3 days. I was out on a trap line, didn't know anything was wrong until I came back and found him." He paused. "He was 68 years old and died alone. And I looked around this place and realized I was on the exact same path. Same life, same isolation, same ending." "You were afraid of dying alone." "Not afraid, just aware." Garrick met her eyes. "My father chose this. Chose to live hard, die hard, not let anyone in. I thought that's what strength looked like. But after he was gone, I started wondering if maybe he was just scared." "Of what?" "Of being seen. Of letting someone know him well enough to see all the rough parts and broken pieces." Garrick set down his cup. "I didn't want that. Didn't want to be so closed off that no one even knew I was gone." May was quiet for a long moment. Rain continued to batter the cabin, but inside it was warm and dry and strangely peaceful. "My turn?" she asked. "If you want. I told you I left the farm after that man tried something. What I didn't tell you is where I went after." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "I tried to make myself fit. Found work in a city, tried to be the kind of woman men wanted, smaller, quieter, agreeable." "How long did that last?" 6 months. 6 miserable months of pretending to be someone I wasn't." Her voice hardened. "And you know what? They still didn't want me, because you can't shrink yourself enough to fit into a space that was never designed for you. You just disappear. So you stop trying. So I stopped trying." May looked at him directly. "Started doing day labor, heavy work, the kind men usually did. Paid better, suited me better. But it also meant I was completely unmarriageable by any conventional standard. Too big, too strong, too independent, too unwilling to defer." "Their loss." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I told myself that. Told myself I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone. And mostly it was true. But sometimes—" She trailed off. "Sometimes it wasn't," Garrick finished. "Sometimes it wasn't." She took a sip of tea. "Then I saw your advertisement, and it was the first honest thing I'd seen in 2 years. You weren't promising romance or comfort. You were offering hard work and isolation with someone who wouldn't judge you for being too much. You gambled. We both did. Thunder cracked directly overhead, close enough to rattle the windows. May didn't flinch." Garrick found himself thinking about all the small ways she'd settled into this life, into this place. How she'd taken the mountain's challenges and met them without complaint. How she'd looked at his rough edges and seen something worth keeping instead of something to fix. "I'm glad you came," he said. May looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Yeah? Yeah, I'm glad I came too." She paused. "Even when you're being stubborn about roof pitch. Even when you're being bossy about chickens." They sat there grinning at each other like fools while the storm raged outside, and Garrick felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to happiness. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet pine. They spent the afternoon checking for damage. A few shingles loose, one section of fence down where a branch had fallen, nothing they couldn't fix. That evening, as they worked on repairs, May brought up something that had apparently been on her mind. "We should talk about the future," she said, holding a fence post steady while Garrick hammered it into place. "What about it? What we're building here? What it means?" She waited until he'd finished hammering before continuing. "We've been living day to day, working well together, but we haven't talked about what comes next." Garrick set down the hammer. "What do you want to come next?" "I want to know if this is permanent, if we're building something that lasts, or if we're just 2 people who happen to be occupying the same space." It was a fair question. They'd been careful with each other, respectful of boundaries, not pushing into territory that hadn't been explicitly opened. But May was right. They couldn't exist in limbo forever. I want permanent, Garrick said. If you do. I do. May's voice was steady. But permanent means we need to define things, make decisions. We need to talk about marriage. The word hung in the air between them. Marriage. It should have felt heavy, frightening. Instead, it just felt right. Okay, Garrick said. Let's talk about it. They finished the fence repair and walked back to the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Inside, May made dinner while Garrick stoked the fire, both of them moving around each other with practiced ease. Once they were seated with food, May started. I need to be clear about something, she said. I don't need marriage to validate my existence or make me respectable. I've lived without it, and I can live without it again. But I want it. With you. If we're going to build this life together, I want it to be official. I want to be your wife, not your housekeeper or your companion or your Shi-Yan. She switched to English. Your trial run. You were never a trial run. Wasn't I? We've been testing each other, seeing if we fit. That's different from using someone. Garrick set down his fork. I want to marry you, not because it's expected or convenient, because you're the first person who's ever looked at me and my life and seen something worth keeping instead of something to escape from. May's expression softened. Same. You're the first person who didn't need me to be less. So we're agreed? We're agreed. She paused. But I have conditions. Of course you do. She ignored the slight smile in his voice. First, I keep my name, May Lin. I'll be your wife, but I won't disappear into being Mrs. Stone. Fair. Second, this is a partnership, equal say in decisions. Neither of us gets to override the other just because. Agreed. Third, if I'm going to be your wife, you need to actually talk to me. Not just about work or supplies or practical things. About real things, feelings, thoughts, fears. I can't be married to a mountain. That one was harder. Garrick had spent his entire life keeping his thoughts locked down, his feelings contained. But looking at May across the table, he knew she was right. If this was going to work, really work, he needed to let her in. I'll try, he said. That's all I'm asking. May picked up her fork again. So, when? When what? When do we get married? Garrick hadn't thought that far ahead. Town has a magistrate. We could go next supply run. That's 3 weeks. Too long? Me considered. No, gives us time to prepare. And there's something I want to do first. What? Write to the matchmaking service. Let them know it worked. She smiled. 1 success out of 6 attempts. They should know. Garrick found himself smiling back. Yeah, they should. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of work and preparation. May wanted to expand the cabin before they married. Not for any practical reason, but because she said it felt important to start their marriage in a space they'd built together rather than one he'd inherited. It's symbolic, she explained, sketching plans in the dirt outside. It's extra work. Yes, but it's our work. Not your father's, ours. So they built. An addition to the main room, extending it by 12 feet. It meant more logs to cut, more stones to gather, more hours of backbreaking labor. But May was right. There was something powerful about building it together, about shaping the space to fit their needs rather than adapting themselves to fit the space. They worked from dawn until dark, and Garrick learned things about May he hadn't known, like how she sang while she worked, old Chinese songs her grandmother had taught her, like how she could lift logs that should have been too heavy for her, sheer stubbornness compensating for physics, like how she'd stop in the middle of a task if she saw something beautiful, a hawk circling overhead, light hitting the peaks just right, and just watch for a moment before returning to work. You're not as practical as you pretend, Garrick observed one afternoon. What do you mean? You stop to watch birds, you talk to chickens, you sing to plants. May flushed slightly. That's still practical. Happy chickens lay better, plants grow better with attention, birds tell you about weather patterns. And the singing? The singing is for me. She hefted a log into place. I can be practical and still appreciate beauty. They're not mutually exclusive. Never said they were. You implied it. I stated a fact. You added implication. She threw a wood chip at him. He caught it and threw it back. They stood there grinning at each other like children, covered in sawdust and sweat, and Garrick realized he'd never been happier. The cabin expansion was nearly finished when they had their first real fight. It started over something stupid. Garrick had moved some of May's gardening tools without telling her, and she'd wasted an hour looking for them. Small thing. Meaningless, really, but tensions had been building with the hard work and the upcoming marriage, and it provided an outlet. "You can't just move my things," May said, her voice tight. "I was organizing. They were in the way. They were where I put them, where I knew they'd be. Well, now they're somewhere better." "Better according to who?" "According to logic," May's eyes flashed. "Your logic, not mine. You didn't ask. You just decided your way was better. And did it." "I didn't think it mattered. That's the problem. You didn't think." She took a breath, visibly trying to calm herself. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You making decisions without me because you're used to being alone. I moved some tools. I didn't sell the cabin." "It's not about the tools." Her voice rose. "It's about respect. It's about treating me like a partner instead of someone who lives in your space." Garrick felt his own temper flare. "That's not fair. I've done nothing but treat you like a partner. Except when you don't. Except when you just do things your way because it's always been your way." "And you're perfect? You never just take over and do things without asking?" "When have I done that?" "The kitchen. The entire kitchen organization. You changed everything without asking if I minded." "You said I could." "I said you could cook. I didn't say you could rearrange 40 years of storage." They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, both furious. Then May did something unexpected. She laughed. Not a happy laugh. A bitter, frustrated sound. "We're idiots," she said. "What?" "We're idiots. We're about to get married and we're fighting about tools and kitchen cabinets." She sat down heavily on a log. "This is what I was afraid of, that we'd just be two stubborn people butting heads instead of actually building something together." Garrick felt his anger drain away. She was right. They were being idiots. He sat down next to her. "I should have asked before moving your things," he said. "I should have asked before reorganizing your kitchen. We're both used to doing everything our own way." "Yeah." May rubbed her face. "How do we fix this?" "We talk, like you said, instead of just doing and assuming the other person will adapt." "That sounds exhausting." "Probably will be." They sat in silence for a moment. Then May leaned against his shoulder, just slightly. Garrick felt the warmth of her through his shirt. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of messing this up. Of us being too broken to make this work." "We're not broken. We're damaged, both of us. Years of being told we're too much, too hard to live with. What if they were right?" Garrick turned to look at her. "They weren't right. They were just wrong for us. There's a difference." "How do you know?" "Because you're sitting here talking to me instead of running away. Because we just had a fight and we're working through it instead of pretending it didn't happen. Because every day I wake up and you're still here, and every day it gets a little easier to imagine you always being here." May was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened, wiping her eyes quickly. "I'm still mad about the tools," she said. "I'm still annoyed about the kitchen. But we'll figure it out?" "We'll figure it out." They did figure it out, through a combination of compromise and clearly defined boundaries. Garrick's tools stayed where Garrick put them. May's tools stayed where May put them. The kitchen was jointly managed with specific areas designated for each of them. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The cabin expansion was completed 2 days before they were scheduled to go to town. They stood back and surveyed their work. Rough, functional, undeniably theirs. "It's good," May said. "It's better than good." She looked at him, eyebrow raised. "Careful, that's almost a compliment." "I can compliment things." "Name one time you've complimented something without being prompted." He thought about it. Couldn't come up with an answer. May laughed. "It's okay. I don't need compliments. I need partnership, which this," she gestured to the cabin, "this is." The night before they left for town, May pulled out a dress Garrick had never seen before. It was simple, dark blue, clearly her best piece of clothing. She held it up critically. "Think this is appropriate for a wedding?" she asked. "You're asking me? You're the only one here." "It's fine." "Fine." She made a face. Such enthusiasm. "You'd look good in a feed sack." May blinked. Was that a compliment? It was a fact. No, that was definitely a compliment. She smiled, something soft and genuine. Thank you. Garrick felt heat rise in his face. He'd never been good at this, at saying the things that made women happy. But May didn't seem to need flowery words, just truth, delivered plainly. I mean it, he said. You could wear anything. Doesn't matter to me. It matters to me. I want to look... She paused, searching for words. I want to look like I'm worth marrying. You are worth marrying. That's why I'm marrying you. Still, I want to make an effort. She folded the dress carefully. My mother would have wanted me to. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother in that context. Not as someone who'd been disappointed in her, but as someone whose opinion still mattered. Garrick understood. His father had been dead 3 years, and he still heard the old man's voice sometimes, commenting on his choices. She would have liked you, May said quietly. Once she got past the fact that you're not Chinese, she would have seen how hard you work, how honest you are. She would have approved. My father would have liked you too, probably would have gotten along with you better than he did with me. Why? Because you're practical. He valued that above everything else. Garrick moved to the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. He never understood why I wanted a wife. Thought it was a weakness. Was he happy? Your father? The question caught Garrick off guard. He'd never really considered it. His father had been many things, strong, capable, hard as the mountain itself, but happy? No, Garrick said finally. I don't think he was. Then he was wrong about it being a weakness. May came to stand beside him. You're allowed to want more than just survival. You're allowed to want connection. So are you. She smiled. So are we. They left at dawn, the cabin secure behind them, all their affairs in order. The ride to town took most of the day, and by the time they arrived, word had already spread that the Beast of Blackridge was bringing another bride to the magistrate. The speculation was different this time, though. Less pitying, more curious. People had seen them together on their last supply run, had witnessed May's confidence, had heard about how she'd stood up to the man who'd mocked them. The whispers weren't about when she'd leave, but about whether she'd actually stay. The magistrate was a thin man named Henderson, who'd performed the brief ceremony for countless couples over his 20 years in office. He looked surprised to see Garrick. Mr. Stone, he said carefully, I wasn't expecting you. We're here to get married, Garrick replied. Henderson looked at May, clearly trying to assess whether she was here willingly or under some form of duress. May met his gaze steadily. I'm May Lin, she said. And yes, I'm choosing this. Let's proceed. The ceremony was brief and entirely practical, which suited them both. No flowers, no music, no crowd of witnesses. Just Henderson reading the required words, Garrick and May responding when prompted, and signatures on a document that made it legal. You may kiss your bride, Henderson said, sounding uncertain whether that part was advisable. Garrick looked at May. They'd been careful with physical affection, respectful of boundaries, not rushing into intimacy, but this was different. This was their wedding. May smiled and stood on her toes, kissing him briefly but firmly. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, no passion, no performance, just a statement of intent. We're in this together. When they pulled apart, Henderson was holding out the marriage certificate. Congratulations, he said, sounding like he actually meant it. May you have a long and prosperous union. They left the magistrate's office as husband and wife, and something about it felt more real than Garrick had expected. The legal document changed nothing practical about their arrangement, but it mattered anyway. It made this permanent. It made May his wife instead of just someone living in his cabin. They bought supplies at the trading post, more than usual now that there were 2 of them permanently. Samuel rang up the order without comment, though his wife, Martha, appeared from the back room and surprised them both. Congratulations, Martha said, and she actually sounded sincere. I hope you'll be very happy together. May nodded, accepting the sentiment without fuss. Thank you. If you need anything, woman things, you understand, you can send word. I know it's isolated up there. I appreciate that. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Recognition that May wasn't just passing through, that she was part of the community now, however loosely defined that community was. On the ride back, May was quiet. Not upset, just thoughtful. Garrick let her be, understanding that sometimes silence was necessary for processing. They were an hour from the cabin when she finally spoke. "That was strange," she said. "What was?" "Being married, having it be official." She shifted behind him on Duke. "I didn't think it would feel different, but it does." "Good different or bad different?" "Just different. More real somehow." She paused. "Does it feel different to you?" Garrick considered. "Yeah, like we committed to something instead of just existing near each other?" "Exactly." Her arms tightened slightly around his waist. "I'm glad we did it." "Me too." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, the mountains casting long shadows across the clearing. Everything looked the same as when they'd left. Chickens settled for the night, garden growing steadily, the expanded cabin solid against the tree line. But Garrick saw it differently now. This wasn't just his father's homestead anymore. It was theirs. That night they consummated the marriage, and it was awkward and unpracticed and nothing like the romantic stories suggested it should be. They were both nervous, both trying too hard, both acutely aware of their own inexperience. Garrick was terrified of hurting her with his size and strength. May kept apologizing for not knowing what she was doing. "Stop apologizing," Garrick said finally. I want to do this right." "There's no right, there's just us figuring it out." She looked at him in the dim light from the dying fire. "You're not disappointed?" "In what?" "In me. In this. I don't know how to be seductive or graceful or any of those things women are supposed to be." Garrick pulled her closer, his hand spanning her back. "Good. I don't know how to be romantic or gentle or whatever men are supposed to be. We'll be terrible at this together." She laughed, tension breaking. "That's possibly the least romantic thing anyone has ever said on their wedding night." "Told you I was bad at this." "You're perfect at this." She kissed him, slower this time, less frantically. "We're perfect at this. Because we're doing it our way." And they were. It wasn't graceful or earth-shattering or any of the things the stories promised. It was real and messy and human, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the loft, May's head on Garrick's chest, both of them too warm and completely content. "That was better," May said drowsily. "Then what?" "Than I expected. People make it sound either terrifying or transcendent. It was just us." "Is that okay?" "That's more than okay." She yawned. "We'll get better at it. Practice makes perfect." Now who's being unromantic? But she was smiling when she said it, and Garrick felt something in his chest that might have been contentment. Summer deepened, and they fell into a rhythm that was both comfortable and constantly evolving. The garden flourished under May's attention, producing more than either of them had expected. She preserved everything, pickling, canning, drying, using techniques she'd learned from her grandmother and others she'd invented out of necessity. "We won't starve this winter," she said with satisfaction, surveying the shelves of preserved goods. "We never would have starved." "No, but there's a difference between not starving and eating well." She held up a jar of pickled vegetables. "This is eating well." Garrick had to admit she was right. His previous winters had been about survival, jerky, beans, whatever he could shoot when the weather allowed. May was building something more, creating a larder that would see them through the cold months with variety and nutrition. The chickens were thriving too, producing eggs faster than they could eat them. May started trading the extras with Samuel, bartering for things they needed. Salt, sugar, fabric for new clothes. Small luxuries that Garrick had gone without for years because they seemed frivolous. "It's not frivolous if it improves quality of life," May argued when he questioned the fabric purchase. "I have clothes. You have rags held together by stubbornness and prayer." She spread the fabric on the table. "I'm making you a new shirt, whether you like it or not." "You said you couldn't sew." "I said I couldn't sew a straight line. Doesn't mean I can't make functional clothing." She measured the fabric against his shoulders. "It won't be pretty, but it'll be warm and whole." The shirt she made was exactly as she'd described. Functional, warm, with seams that wandered, but held. Garrick wore it with more pride than he'd felt for any piece of clothing in his life. "See?" May said, examining her handiwork with critical eyes. "Not pretty, but it works." "Like us." She laughed. "Exactly like us." But their peace was disrupted in late July when a stranger appeared at the cabin. Garrick was splitting wood when he heard Duke whinny a warning. He looked up to see a man on horseback emerging from the trees leading a pack mule. The stranger was older, maybe 60, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent their life outdoors. Garrick set down the axe and waited, positioning himself between the stranger and the cabin where May was working. Old habits from a lifetime on the frontier, you didn't trust anyone until they proved themselves trustworthy. The man stopped a respectful distance away and raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon," he called. "You Garrick Stone?" "Depends on who's asking." "Name's William Carter. I've got a trap line about 15 miles north of here." He gestured to the pack mule. "Was hoping to trade some pelts. Heard you might be interested." Garrick relaxed slightly but didn't move. "What makes you think that?" "Samuel down at the trading post mentioned you. Said you were honest, paid fair, didn't cheat on weight." Carter shifted in his saddle. "Also heard you got married recently. Figured congratulations were in order." "News travels." "Always does." Carter looked past Garrick to the cabin. "Your wife home?" Before Garrick could answer, May emerged from the cabin. She was carrying the rifle, not aimed but ready, her expression calm and assessing. "I'm home," she said. "Who's asking?" Carter tipped his hat. "William Carter, ma'am. No trouble intended, just looking to trade." May studied him for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. "Show us what you have." They spent the next hour examining Carter's pelts and negotiating prices. The man was fair, his goods were quality, and he didn't try to cheat them. By the end of it, they'd worked out a deal that benefited everyone. "You come through this way often?" Garrick asked as they loaded the pelts. "Every few months. I've got a circuit I run. My cabin, down through the valley, over to the trading post, back around." Carter secured the last bundle. "If you're interested, I could make this a regular stop. Save you both the trip to town." May and Garrick exchanged a look. Having a reliable trader who came to them would be valuable, especially once winter set in and the trip to town became dangerous. "We'd be interested," May said. "What do you need in trade?" "Whatever you've got. Preserved food, fresh eggs if you have them, ammunition, tools." Carter gathered his reins. "I'm not picky. Just need to keep moving, keep trading." "Why?" May asked. "Why not settle somewhere?" Carter's expression shifted, something sad passing across his features. "Had a place once. Wife, children, the whole thing. Fever took them all 10 years back, couldn't stay there after." The silence was too loud. Garrick felt May's hand find his, a brief squeeze of understanding and solidarity. "I'm sorry," May said quietly. "Appreciate it." Carter swung into his saddle. "But that's old pain. You two look like you've got something good building here. Hold on to that." He rode off, disappearing into the trees, and Garrick and May stood together watching him go. "That could have been you," May said softly. "What? If I hadn't come? If no one had come? You could have ended up like him, moving constantly because staying still hurt too much." Garrick didn't argue. She was probably right. Instead, he pulled her closer, solid and real against his side. "But you did come," he said. "Yeah, I did." August brought a heat wave that turned the cabin into an oven and drove them to work early mornings and late evenings, spending the brutal midday hours in the shade by the stream. May rigged a canvas shelter there, creating a space where they could escape the worst of the heat. "This is miserable," she said one particularly brutal afternoon, lying in the shallow water with her clothes on. "Could be worse." "How?" "Could be winter, cold and miserable instead of hot and miserable." She splashed water at him. "That's not comforting." "Wasn't trying to be comforting, was trying to be factual. You're impossible." But she was grinning when she said it, and Garrick found himself grinning back. They developed this pattern over the months, mock arguing, trading barbs, pushing each other's buttons in ways that would have seemed hostile from the outside but felt like affection from the inside. "Can I ask you something?" Garrick said, trailing his hand in the cool water. "You're asking permission to ask? This must be serious. Do you miss it? The city, other people, having neighbors you could actually see?" Me considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I miss certain things, being able to get supplies without a 2-hour ride, having other women to talk to, seeing more faces than just yours." She turned to look at him. "But I don't miss the way people looked at me." Don't miss trying to shrink myself to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. Don't miss being lonely in a crowd. You're not lonely here? I'm alone here. There's a difference. She sat up, water streaming from her clothes. Alone is a choice. Lonely is a condition. I chose this. Chose you. That makes all the difference. I chose you too. I know. She smiled. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stayed. The heat wave broke with another massive storm, this one lasting 3 days. They were trapped inside, the rain so heavy they couldn't even make it to the chicken coop without getting drenched. May fretted about the garden, about the chickens, about the supplies they'd left in the smokehouse. It'll be fine, Garrick said. You don't know that. No, but worrying won't change it. She glared at him. I hate when you're logical. No, you don't. You're right, I don't. She moved to the window, watching the rain sheet down. But I hate feeling helpless. Garrick came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Not helpless, just waiting. There's a difference. Is this going to be your new thing? Pointing out differences? Maybe. She leaned back against him, accepting the comfort. The garden's probably destroyed. Probably not. You built it well. You don't know that either. No. But I know you. If you built it, it'll survive. May turned in his arms, looking up at him. When did you get so confident in me? About 5 minutes after you showed up and started reorganizing my life. She laughed, and the sound filled the cabin, pushing back against the storm's roar. They spent the 3 days talking, playing cards with a battered deck Garrick found in a drawer, making love when the mood struck, and generally driving each other mildly insane with proximity. I love you, May said on the 3rd day, the words coming out of nowhere while they were playing their 5th consecutive game of cards. Garrick looked up, startled. They hadn't said it before, hadn't felt the need to name what was building between them. But hearing it now, he realized he'd been feeling it for weeks. I love you too, he said. May set down her cards. That's it? Just, I love you too? What else should I say? I don't know, something romantic, poetic? You want poetry? You married the wrong man. I married exactly the right man. She stood and came around the table, settling in his lap despite his half-hearted protest about her weight. Say it again. I love you. Better. She kissed him. Again. I love you. One more time. I love you, and you're being ridiculous. She grinned. Perfect. When the storm finally passed, the garden had survived with minimal damage. A few plants had been beaten down, but not broken, and the drainage system May had built had prevented flooding. The chickens were fine, if somewhat disgruntled about being cooped up. The supplies in the smokehouse were intact. See, Garrick said. Told you it would be fine. You got lucky. No, you're skilled. She pretended to be annoyed, but he could see the pleasure in her expression. May didn't need constant praise, but she appreciated recognition when it came. September brought the first hints of autumn, the aspens beginning to turn gold on the high slopes. They worked frantically to finish preparations for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, reinforcing the cabin's insulation, processing the last of the garden's bounty, hunting to build up their meat supply. William Carter came through again, bringing news from the wider world and goods they couldn't source locally. He stayed for dinner this time, trading stories with them by the fire. You two seem well settled, he observed, accepting a second helping of May's stew. We are, May said simply. Good. Good to see. Carter looked at Garrick. I remember when you first came to these mountains. You were what, 20? Following your father around like a shadow. 22. Right. And already looked like you could wrestle a bear. He smiled. But you were quiet, real quiet. Your father did all the talking. He had things to say. I didn't. Or maybe you just never found someone worth talking to. Carter glanced at May. Until now. After Carter left, May confronted Garrick about it. You were really that quiet? She asked. Quieter, probably. Why? Garrick shrugged. My father didn't tolerate what he called unnecessary noise. Talking was for conveying information, not sharing feelings or thoughts. Anything else was wasted breath. That's terrible. That's how he was. Garrick stoked the fire, not looking at her. I didn't know any different. Thought that's how all men were supposed to be. What changed? He died, and I spent 2 years alone with no one to talk to at all, and I realized silence can be its own kind of prison. He turned to face her. Then you came, and you demanded I actually communicate. And it was hard at first, really hard. But it got easier. Is it still hard? Sometimes. When I can't find the right words or when the feeling is too big to fit into language. He reached for her hand. But with you, even the silence feels like communication. Me squeezed his hand. I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll keep talking, even when it's hard, even when you can't find perfect words. Just keep trying. I promise. Good. She pulled him toward the loft. Now come to bed. We have an early day tomorrow. October brought the first real snow, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but signaled what was coming. They doubled their efforts, working until exhaustion claimed them each night. The root cellar was packed, the woodshed was full, the cabin was sealed against drafts. They'd done everything they could to prepare. Think we're ready? May asked one evening, surveying their work. As ready as we can be. That's not the same as actually ready. It never is. Winter always finds the weaknesses. Garrick wrapped an arm around her shoulders. But we'll handle it, together. Together, she echoed. The first major storm hit in early November, dumping 3 feet of snow in 2 days and cutting them off completely from the outside world. They were trapped in the cabin, the wind howling like something alive, the temperature plummeting to dangerous levels. May paced like a caged animal the first day. I hate this, she said. Being stuck inside, unable to do anything. We can do things, just not outside things. You know what I mean. Garrick did. He'd spent enough winters trapped in this cabin to understand the particular madness that came with being confined, but he'd also learned how to manage it. Come here, he said. Why? Just come here. She came, suspicious. Garrick pulled her to the window where they could see the storm raging. Look at that, he said. Really look at it. I see a blizzard. You see power. You see the mountain showing what it's capable of. He kept his arm around her. My father used to say that watching storms reminded him how small we are, how little control we actually have. He found it humbling. Did you? I found it terrifying, still do sometimes. He paused. But I also find it beautiful. All that force, all that energy, and we're safe in here, warm and fed and together. May leaned into him. I see what you're doing. What am I doing? Reframing, making the prison feel like sanctuary. Is it working? She considered. A little. They spent the storm days playing games, telling stories, making elaborate meals from their stores, just to pass the time. May taught Garrick phrases in Chinese, laughing at his pronunciation. He taught her how to repair his traps, how to sharpen knives to a perfect edge, all the small skills his father had beaten into him. On the third day, May was quiet. Not upset, just thoughtful. Garrick let her be until she was ready to talk. I'm pregnant, she said finally. Garrick felt the world tilt. What? I'm pregnant. Have been for a while, I think. Couple months, maybe. She looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. I wasn't sure when to tell you. Are you... He didn't know how to finish the question. Happy? Scared? Ready? I'm terrified, May admitted. I don't know anything about being a mother. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. And bringing a child into this world, this life. She gestured around the cabin. It's hard. Yeah, it is. Is that all you have to say? Garrick pulled her close, his mind racing. A child. His child. Their child. The thought was overwhelming. I'm terrified too, he said. I had a terrible father. What if I'm the same? What if I don't know how to be gentle or patient or any of the things children need? You're already those things with me. That's different. Is it? May pulled back to look at him. You were patient when I was learning this life. You were gentle when I needed it. You can be those things. We don't know that. We don't know anything for certain, but we can try. She placed his hand on her stomach, still flat, but holding their future. We can try together. Garrick felt something shift inside him, fear transforming into something more complex. Not quite hope yet, but close. Together, he agreed. The storm passed, and they emerged into a world transformed by snow. Everything was clean, white, silent in the way only deep winter can be. They checked on everything, chickens huddled but alive, supplies intact, cabin solid against the elements. "We made it," May said. "First one. Many more to come." She looked at him. "With one more person to protect." The weight of that responsibility settled on Garrick's shoulders. A child. Someone completely dependent on them for survival. It should have been crushing, but instead it felt like purpose. "We should expand again," he said, "before the baby comes. Need more space." "In the middle of winter? We've got time before the worst of it, and I can't just sit around doing nothing. I'll go crazy." May smiled. "Then we expand." They spent the winter working on the cabin between storms, adding a separate room that would eventually be for the child. It was slow work in the cold, but it gave them both something to focus on besides the isolation and the coming responsibility. William Carter appeared in late December, somehow navigating the treacherous winter trails. "You're insane," Garrick told him. "Probably." Carter stamped snow from his boots. "But I had supplies I thought you might need." He'd brought fabric, thread, things for the baby. May looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "Didn't for certain, but I've seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs." He smiled. "Congratulations, both of you." They fed him, warmed him, sent him on his way with fresh supplies and gratitude. After he left, May stood at the window watching the snow fall. "People know," she said. "Our business is spreading." "Does that bother you?" "No, it's just strange. We're not really part of any community, but somehow we're still connected to it. Frontier life. Everyone knows everyone eventually." She turned to face him. "Do you think our child will grow up isolated, without friends or peers?" It was a question Garrick had been avoiding. "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe we'll find ways to connect, bring them to town more often, visit Carter when he comes through, something. I don't want them to be lonely. They won't be. They'll have us. And they'll have this." He gestured to the world outside. "The mountain, the forest, all of it. That's not nothing." "No." May returned to his side. "It's not nothing." Winter deepened, the snow piling higher, the cold settling in like it would never leave. They were trapped for days at a time, the world shrinking to just the cabin and each other. But unlike Garrick's previous winters, this one wasn't lonely. This one was full. May's body changed as the pregnancy progressed. She moved differently, tired more easily, needed more rest. Garrick found himself being careful with her in ways that would have annoyed her before, but now she accepted them with grace. "I'm not fragile," she said one day when he tried to take a heavy pot from her. "I know, but you're growing a person. That's hard work." "So is everything else we do." "Yeah, but this is harder and more important." He set the pot on the stove. "Let me help." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but I'm still chopping wood." "Didn't say you couldn't." "You were thinking it." "I was thinking a lot of things. That wasn't one of them." They found a new balance, adjusting to May's changing capabilities, preparing not just for winter, but for the child that would arrive in spring. And through it all, the cabin held them safe. The mountain stood watch, and the life they'd built together grew stronger with each passing day. February came with a cold so brutal it turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Garrick woke one morning to find frost coating the inside of the windows, their breath visible even with the fire banked. May was curled against him, her belly round and prominent now, radiating warmth. "Don't move," she mumbled. "You'll let the cold in." "Need to get the fire going. 5 more minutes." "You said that yesterday, and I'll say it tomorrow." But she was already shifting, sitting up with the careful movements of someone carrying extra weight. "Help me up." Garrick pulled her to her feet, and she stood there swaying slightly, one hand on her back. "This is miserable," she said. "You've said that before, too. And I'll keep saying it until this baby decides to come out." She waddled toward the chamber pot they'd moved closer to the bed. "I can't see my feet. Do I still have feet?" "You have feet. Are they still attached?" "Last I checked." She muttered something in Chinese that probably wasn't complimentary. Garrick grinned and went to stoke the fire, building it up until the cabin started to warm. By the time May emerged from behind the privacy screen, He had water heating for tea. Martha sent word through Carter last week, May said, easing herself into a chair. Said she'd come up when the baby's close if we needed help. You want her here? Mai was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Part of me wants to do this ourselves, prove we can. But part of me is terrified something will go wrong and we won't know what to do. What does the book say? They had one book on childbirth, purchased months ago from the Trading Post. It was clinical, informative, and completely unhelpful in terms of actually preparing them for what was coming. May had read it cover to cover 3 times. The book says lots of things can go wrong. Bleeding, infection, the baby being positioned wrong, the cord wrapped around its neck. She stopped, taking a breath. The book is terrifying. Garrick brought her tea and sat across from her. What do you want to do? I want this to be easy. I want the baby to come out healthy and perfect, and for us to magically know what we're doing. She wrapped her hands around the cup. But since that's not realistic, I think we should ask Martha to come, just in case. Okay. You're not going to argue about having a stranger here? Martha's not a stranger, and if having her here makes you feel safer, that's what matters. May looked at him for a long moment. You've gotten very good at this. At what? Saying the right thing, being supportive. All those husband things you claimed you didn't know how to do. I'm learning. You're doing more than learning. She paused, searching for words. You're being exactly what I need, even when I'm cranky and huge and can't see my own feet. You're growing a person. You're allowed to be cranky. See? That. Right there. She smiled. Perfect thing to say? The weather broke enough in late February for Garrick to make it to town. He left at dawn, promising to be back before dark, leaving May with the rifle and strict instructions not to do anything stupid. Define stupid, she'd said. Anything I wouldn't want to come home and find you doing. That's a very broad category. Good. The ride to town was brutal, Duke struggling through snow that came up to his chest in places. Garrick questioned the wisdom of this trip multiple times, but May needed supplies and he needed to arrange for Martha to come when the time was right. Samuel looked surprised to see him. Didn't expect anyone off the mountain until spring. Need to stock up and need to talk to your wife. Martha appeared from the back, wiping flour from her hands. How's May doing? Uncomfortable. Ready for the baby to come. Scared. Normal, normal, and normal. Martha grabbed a piece of paper and started writing. Here's what you need to have ready. Clean cloths, lots of them. Boiled water. Sharp knife for the cord. Thread for tying it off. Whiskey for sterilizing, and for May if she needs it for pain. She doesn't drink. She will if the pain gets bad enough. Martha kept writing. You need someone who knows what they're doing. I've birthed 7 children and helped with maybe 30 more. I can come up when she's close. How will we know when she's close? She'll know. Trust me, she'll know. Send word and I'll come. Won't be comfortable, but I'll come. Garrick felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Thank you. That girl had the guts to come up that mountain and marry you when 5 others ran away. Least I can do is make sure she and the baby survive the experience. Martha handed him the list. Get these supplies. And Garrick? Yeah? You're going to be fine, both of you. Babies are born every day in worse conditions than you've got. The ride back was even harder. Duke loaded with supplies, the temperature dropping as the sun set. Garrick pushed harder than he should have, worry gnawing at him. Leaving May alone in her condition felt wrong, even though he knew she was capable and armed. He found her exactly where he'd left her, sitting by the fire with her sewing, though she'd moved on from making baby clothes to repairing one of his shirts. You came back, she said. Did you think I wouldn't? No. But it's still nice to see you. She set aside the sewing. Get what we needed? Everything, and Martha will come when you're ready. Relief washed over May's face. Good. That's good. March arrived with false promises of spring. The temperature would climb during the day, melting the top layer of snow into slush, then plummet at night and freeze everything solid. The result was a landscape of ice that made even simple tasks treacherous. May fell on the way to the chicken coop. Garrick was in the smokehouse when he heard her cry out. He ran, slipping on the ice himself, and found her on the ground, clutching her belly. Are you hurt? He was already running his hands over her, checking for injuries, panic making his movements clumsy. I'm fine. Just scared. The baby... Is the baby moving? May went still, focusing inward. Then she nodded. Yes, moving like crazy, actually. I think I scared it too. Garrick helped her up, supporting her weight as they made their way back to the cabin. Once inside, he settled her by the fire and she started crying. I'm sorry, she said, wiping at her eyes. I'm being ridiculous. You're being pregnant and scared. That's not ridiculous. I could have hurt the baby, could have lost it because I wasn't careful enough. But you didn't. The baby's fine. You're fine. He knelt in front of her. We'll be more careful. I'll handle the chickens from now on. For how long? I could be pregnant for another month. Then I'll handle them for another month. May laughed through her tears. You hate the chickens. I tolerate the chickens. There's a difference. She reached out and cupped his face with both hands. I love you, even when you're being stubborn about poultry. I love you too, even when you're being stubborn about everything else. The baby came 3 weeks later on a day that started no different from any other. May woke before dawn with what she thought was indigestion. By mid-morning, she knew better. The pains were coming regularly, building in intensity, unmistakably labor. Get Martha, she told Garrick. Now? Yes, now. This baby isn't waiting for convenient timing. Garrick rode faster than he should have, Duke nearly losing his footing twice on the icy trail. He found Martha at the trading post and she took one look at his face and started gathering supplies. How far apart are the pains? She asked. I don't know. She just told me to get you. Then we need to hurry. They made it back to the cabin by early afternoon. Martha took one look at May, who was gripping the edge of the table and breathing through another contraction, and immediately took charge. Garrick, I need hot water and those clean cloths we talked about. May, let's get you somewhere more comfortable. The next hours were a blur. May labored through the afternoon and into the evening, her strength and stubbornness both on full display. She didn't scream or cry out, just gritted her teeth and bore down when Martha told her to, rested when she could between contractions. Garrick felt useless. He boiled water, fetched cloths, held May's hand when she needed it, and stayed out of the way when she didn't. Martha worked with calm efficiency, checking May's progress, offering encouragement, making decisions with the confidence of someone who'd done this dozens of times. I can see the head, Martha said as night fell fully. Next contraction, you push hard. This baby's ready to meet the world. May pushed, her face contorting with effort, and Garrick felt his hand being crushed in her grip. Then Martha was lifting something, and a thin wail filled the cabin. It's a girl, Martha announced, working quickly to clear the baby's airway. A healthy girl. May collapsed back, exhausted and crying. Martha wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and placed her on May's chest. The baby was tiny, wrinkled, covered in vernix and blood, and absolutely perfect. She's so small, May whispered. She's perfect-sized, Martha said, already working on the afterbirth. Good weight, good color, good lungs. You did well. Garrick couldn't take his eyes off the baby. His daughter. The concept was overwhelming. This tiny person who hadn't existed 9 months ago was now here, real and squalling and completely dependent on them. What will you name her? Martha asked. May looked at Garrick. They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Grace, Garrick said suddenly. For the grace we were given in finding each other. May's eyes filled with fresh tears. Gracelyn Stone. Perfect. Martha stayed for 2 days, teaching them how to care for the baby, making sure May was recovering properly, answering the 1,000 questions they didn't know they had. When she finally left, pressing payment into Garrick's hands despite his protests, they were alone with their daughter for the first time. Now what? May asked, staring down at Grace sleeping in the cradle Garrick had built months ago. Now we figure it out. Same as everything else. This feels different than fixing a fence or planting a garden. It is different. It's harder and more important, and we'll probably make mistakes. Garrick put his arm around her. But we'll make them together. Grace was not an easy baby. She had strong lungs and she used them, waking every few hours to eat, crying when she was wet or uncomfortable or for no reason Garrick or May could determine. They stumbled through those first weeks in a fog of exhaustion, taking turns walking the cabin with her, trying different ways to soothe her, learning her particular needs and preferences. I don't know what I'm doing, May said one night, rocking Grace while tears streamed down her own face. She won't stop crying, and I've tried everything. Garrick took the baby, giving May a break. Grace continued to wail, her tiny face red with effort. He walked the cabin, bouncing her gently, humming tunelessly because he'd heard that sometimes helped. Slowly, Grace's cries subsided. She looked up at him with unfocused eyes, and Garrick felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "There you go," he said quietly. "That's better, isn't it?" "How did you do that?" May asked from where she'd collapsed on the bed. "No idea. Luck, maybe. We need more than luck. We have more than luck. We have each other. And we have stubbornness. That counts for something." May laughed weakly. "Stubbornness. That's our parenting strategy. Could be worse." April brought real spring, the snow finally retreating, the world coming back to life. Grace was 2 months old and starting to develop a personality that was equal parts her mother's determination and her father's quiet intensity. They took her outside for the first time on a warm afternoon, May carrying her while Garrick hovered nervously. "She's not made of glass," May said. "I know." "Then stop acting like she'll shatter if the wind blows wrong." "Can't help it." May smiled and held Grace up so she could see the mountains. The baby's eyes tracked movement without really focusing, taking in this new world of light and space and endless sky. "This is your home," May told her. "These mountains, this valley, all of it, will teach you how to live here, how to be strong and capable and unafraid. And how to be yourself," Garrick added. "No matter what anyone else thinks you should be." They stood there together, the three of them, and Garrick felt something settle into place. This was his family. Not the one he'd been born into, but the one he'd chosen and built. The one that had chosen and built him in return. William Carter arrived in May with his usual load of goods and news. He took one look at Grace, bundled in May's arms, and his weathered face split into a genuine smile. "Well now," he said, "isn't she something?" "We think so," May said. Carter traded with them, furs for supplies, news for news, and before he left, he pulled something from his pack. "Found this in a town down south," he said, handing May a small wooden rattle carved in the shape of a bird. "Thought your little one might like it." May's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You didn't have to—" "Wanted to." Carter tipped his hat. "You two have built something good here, real good. That baby's lucky to have you." After he left, May held the rattle and cried. "What's wrong?" Garrick asked. "Nothing, everything. She wiped her eyes. "I didn't expect kindness. Didn't expect people to care. People care. I know, that's what's making me cry." The summer was different with Grace. Everything took longer, required more planning. Simple tasks like checking the garden or tending the chickens became complex operations involving bringing the baby along or coordinating schedules so one of them could watch her. But there were unexpected joys, too. Grace's first smile, which came on a morning when May was singing to her. The way she'd grip Garrick's finger with surprising strength. How she'd settle immediately when she heard May's voice, recognizing the sound that had been with her since before birth. "She knows you," Garrick observed one evening, watching May nurse the baby. "She should. I'm the one with the food." "It's more than that. She trusts you completely." May looked down at Grace, something soft in her expression. "I hope I deserve that trust." "You do." "You can't know that." "I can. Because I trust you the same way, completely." May met his eyes, and in that moment, the cabin held everything that mattered: family, safety, love spoken and unspoken. Grace grew through the summer, becoming more alert, more interactive. She started reaching for things, babbling nonsense sounds, responding to her parents' voices with coos and squeals. May wore her in a sling while working, talking to her constantly, teaching her the names of plants and chickens and mountains. "She can't understand you," Garrick said, watching this one afternoon. "Not yet. But she will. And when she does, she'll know all of this already." May adjusted the sling. "My grandmother did this with me, talked to me about everything while I was too young to understand. She said it helped me learn the world." "Did it work?" "I'm here, aren't I? Understanding the world well enough to survive it." Garrick couldn't argue with that logic. They had another fight in August, this one about expanding the homestead. Garrick wanted to build another structure, a proper barn for Dukin's storage. May wanted to focus on improving what they had rather than building new. We need more space, Garrick argued. We need what we have to work better. The smokehouse still needs repairs. The root cellar could be deeper. The chicken coop needs reinforcement. I can do both, not before winter, and I'd rather have everything we have working perfectly than have new things half finished. They went back and forth, both getting frustrated, both sure they were right. Grace, sitting in her cradle, watched them with wide eyes as their voices rose. "We're scaring the baby," May said finally. Garrick looked at Grace, who was indeed looking alarmed. "Sorry, little one, your parents are being idiots. Speak for yourself. I'm speaking for both of us." He sat down heavily. "We're doing it again, fighting instead of finding middle ground." May joined him at the table. "What's the middle ground between a barn and repairs?" "We do the repairs first. Make sure everything is solid. Then if there's time before winter, we start the barn. If not, it waits until spring." "That's reasonable." "Don't sound so surprised." She smiled. "I'm learning you can be reasonable. Occasionally." "Same to you." They worked through the rest of summer and into fall, making improvements, storing supplies, preparing for Grace's first winter. Martha came to visit in September, bringing clothes Grace had already outgrown from her own grandchildren. "She's thriving," Martha said, watching Grace crawl across the cabin floor with determined concentration. "You're both doing well." "We're figuring it out," May said. "You're doing more than that. You're building a real family, a real life." Martha smiled. "There were people who said it wouldn't work, said you two were too different, too damaged, too set in your ways. They were wrong." "They were wrong about a lot of things," Garrick said. Grace's first winter was easier than Garrick and May had feared. The cabin was warmer with 3 people instead of 2, and Grace seemed to enjoy the enforced closeness of the cold months. She learned to pull herself up on furniture, to say approximations of mama and dada, to laugh at Duke's patient tolerance of her grabbing his ears. One night in January, as a storm raged outside, Grace fell asleep in Garrick's arms while he told her a story. May watched from across the cabin, her expression unreadable. "What?" Garrick asked quietly. "I was just thinking about the letter I wrote you, about being too much for the world." "What about it?" "I was right. We were both too much for the world out there, too big, too stubborn, too unwilling to shrink." She came to sit beside him. "But here, in this place we built, there's room for everything we are. Room for all of it." Garrick looked down at Grace, then around the cabin, expanded, improved, filled with evidence of their work and their life. "Yeah," he said. "There is." Spring came again, Grace's first birthday approaching. They marked the day with a small celebration, a special meal, a gift William Carter had delivered weeks before, time together as a family, acknowledging how far they'd come. "She's walking now," May said, watching Grace toddle from one parent to the other. "Soon she'll be running. Soon she'll be too fast for us to catch." "Probably." May pulled Grace into her lap when the baby reached her. "But we'll keep up. We always do." That night, after Grace was asleep, May and Garrick stood outside looking at the stars. The air was cool, but not cold, spring smells drifting on the breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" May asked. "Regret what?" "Choosing this. Me. This life." Garrick turned to look at her, this woman who'd walked into his life and transformed everything. "Never," he said. "Not once." "You?" "Never." She leaned against him. "I found what I was searching for. A place where being too much is exactly enough. A partner who doesn't need me to be less. A life that fits." "We fit." "We do." She smiled. "Took a while to figure out how, but we do." Inside the cabin, Grace made a small sound in her sleep. They both turned to check on her through the window, united in their instinct to protect and care for this small person they'd created. "Think we're doing it right?" Garrick asked. "I think we're doing it our way. Right will have to be close enough." They stayed outside a while longer, taking in the mountain silence, the space they'd carved out of the wilderness, the life they'd built piece by piece through stubbornness and determination and love. 2 people the world had rejected had found each other and built something that mattered, something that would last, something worth all the struggles that had brought them here. The mountain stood watch, eternal and patient, holding their small family in its vast embrace, And in the cabin, their daughter slept safe and warm, proof that sometimes being too much for the world just meant you were exactly right for the world you built yourself. Grace was 3 when she asked her first real question that mattered. They were working in the garden, May showing her how to tell when the beans were ready to pick, when Grace held up a pod and said, "Why we here?" May paused, glancing at Garrick, who was repairing the fence nearby. He'd heard it too, had stopped mid-hammer swing. "What do you mean, little one?" May asked. Grace gestured broadly, her small hand encompassing the cabin, the mountains, everything. "Why we live here? Not in town?" It was a fair question. Grace had been to town 3 times now, had seen other children, other families living in houses close together with neighbors and stores and people everywhere. The contrast with their isolated life must have been stark to a child's eyes. Mee sat back on her heels, considering how to answer. Garrick came over, joining them, waiting to hear what his wife would say. "You know how you don't like it when your dress is too tight?" May asked. "How it makes you feel squeezed and uncomfortable?" Grace nodded seriously. "Well, living in town felt like that for your father and me, like we were wearing clothes that didn't fit right. Everyone wanted us to be smaller, quieter, different than we were." May brushed dirt from Grace's hands. "Here, on the mountain, we can be exactly who we are, big and loud and stubborn and strong. We fit here." "I fit too?" "You fit perfectly." Grace thought about this, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then she looked at Garrick. "Dada fit?" "Yeah," Garrick said, his voice rough. "Dada fits too." "Good." Grace returned to examining beans as if the existential question of their entire existence had been resolved to her satisfaction. May caught Garrick's eye and smiled. He smiled back, and in that moment they shared the understanding that they were doing something right. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way other people did it, but right for them. Grace grew like a weed through that summer and the next, becoming more herself with each passing season. She had May's determination and Garrick's quiet intensity, combined with a fearlessness that terrified them both. She climbed everything, explored everything, questioned everything. "She's going to fall," Garrick said one afternoon, watching Grace scale a tree near the cabin. "Probably," May agreed, not looking up from the vegetables she was cutting. "You're not worried?" "Of course I'm worried, but she needs to learn her limits. Can't learn without testing them." Grace made it to a branch 10 feet up and sat there triumphantly. "Mama, Dada, look!" "We see you," May called back. "Be careful." "I am careful." She was, in her own way. Grace took risks, but calculated ones, testing what she could do with the same methodical approach May brought to everything. When she did fall, and she did several times, she'd pick herself up, assess the damage, and try again with adjustments. "She's like you," Garrick observed one evening after Grace had skinned her knee and then immediately climbed back on Duke despite the pain. "She's like both of us," May corrected. "Stubborn like me, tough like you." Lucky her, lucky us. May watched Grace through the window, now brushing Duke's mane with intense focus. We made something good. They had. Not perfect. There were still fights, still moments of doubt, still days when the isolation felt heavy, or Grace's energy was overwhelming, or the work seemed endless. But good. Real. Theirs. William Carter became a regular fixture in their lives, coming through every few months with supplies and news. Grace adored him, calling him Uncle William despite no blood relation. He'd bring her small gifts, a ribbon, a carved animal, once a book of fairy tales that became her most treasured possession. "You're spoiling her," May said after one visit. "Someone should," Carter replied. "Child growing up on a mountain needs some magic in her life." "She has magic. She has the whole mountain. Different kind of magic." Carter swung into his saddle. "Besides, what else am I going to do with my money? Can't take it with me when I go." It was meant lightly, but something in his tone made Garrick look up sharply. Carter looked thinner than he had 6 months ago, moving a little slower. "You all right?" Garrick asked. "Old is what I am. 67 last month. Been riding these mountains for more than 40 years. Carter adjusted his hat. "Don't live forever, even if we try." After he left, May voiced what Garrick had been thinking. "He's not well." "No. We should check on him more, make sure he's okay." "He'd hate that. His pride won't allow coddling. Then we'll be subtle about it." May started planning already. He could see it in her face. Next time he comes through, we'll send extra supplies with him. Things that keep. Medical supplies, too. They did, and Carter accepted with grace, understanding what they were doing without calling them on it. It became their pattern, Carter bringing news and gifts, them sending him off with supplies and concern disguised as generosity. Grace turned 5 the summer everything changed. It started with a letter, not delivered by Carter this time, but brought by a young man on horseback who'd ridden up from town specifically to find them. He looked nervous, sitting on his horse at a respectful distance while Garrick approached. "Mr. Stone?" "Yeah. I have a letter for you, from the matchmaking service." He held out an envelope. "They paid me to deliver it personally." Garrick took it, frowning. He hadn't heard from the matchmaking service since before he and May married. What could they possibly want now, years later? The young man tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Garrick standing there with the envelope. May came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's that?" "Letter from the matchmaking service." Her eyebrows rose. After all this time? They opened it together, standing in the afternoon sun while Grace played with the chickens nearby. The letter was formal, typed, very official. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Stone, we hope this letter finds you well. We are writing to inform you of an unusual request we have received. Over the past 5 years, we have had numerous inquiries about your story, how a 6th bride succeeded where 5 had failed. These inquiries have come from individuals who, like Mrs. Stone, feel they do not fit conventional expectations for marriage. We would like permission to use your story, anonymously, if you prefer, as an example in our materials. We believe it could provide hope to others who have been told they are too much in various ways. We would compensate you for this permission and would be happy to discuss terms. If you're willing, we would also like to invite you to speak at our annual gathering of clients and matchmakers. Your perspective on building an unconventional life together would be valuable to many who struggle to envision such possibilities. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Helena Morrison." Director May read it twice, then looked at Garrick. "They want to use us as an example." "Apparently." "Of what? How to be too stubborn to fail? How to find someone who fits instead of someone who tolerates you?" Garrick reread the letter. "What do you think?" May was quiet for a long moment, watching Grace chase a chicken around the yard. "I think there are probably people out there like we were, told they're wrong, too much, impossible to love. If our story helps them believe they can find what we found," she trailed off. "You want to do it. I want to consider it, don't you?" Garrick thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago. Alone, convinced he was meant to die that way, resigned to following his father's path. If someone had told him then that he could have this, a wife who understood him, a daughter who filled the cabin with laughter, a life that felt full instead of empty, would he have believed them? "Yeah," he said. "I want to consider it." They discussed it for days, weighing the value of privacy against the potential to help others. Grace, with a child's perceptiveness, picked up that something was different. "Why are you both serious?" she asked one evening. "We're trying to make a decision," May said. "What decision?" "Whether to share our story with other people." Grace looked between them. "The story about how you found each other?" "Yeah, that's a good story." Grace climbed into Garrick's lap, something she did less often now that she was getting bigger. "You should share good stories. Uncle William says stories are how we teach people things. Out of the mouths of children, as the saying went." Garrick looked at May and saw his own decision reflected in her face. They wrote back to the matchmaking service with conditions. Yes, they would allow their story to be used, but anonymously. Yes, they would consider speaking, but it would have to be brief and on their terms. Yes, they believed in what they'd built and wanted others to know it was possible. The response came quickly, agreeing to everything. The annual gathering was in September, 2 months away. They'd pay for travel, provide accommodations, ask only that Garrick and May speak honestly about their experience. "We're really doing this," May said, holding the confirmation letter. "Too late to back out now." "Would you? If you could?" Garrick thought about it honestly. "No, you?" "No." She smiled. "We built something worth sharing. Time we stopped hiding it on a mountain." They left for the gathering in early September, bringing Grace with them. Martha agreed to check on the cabin and animals while they were gone. William Carter, who'd been thrilled to hear about the trip, gave Grace a new dress for the occasion. "You represent us mountain folk," he'd said. "Make us proud." The gathering was in a city 3 days' travel away, larger than any place Grace had ever seen. She pressed her face to the train window, eyes wide, taking in buildings that stretched toward the sky and streets filled with more people than she'd known existed. "So many," she whispered. "Too many," Garrick muttered, uncomfortable with the crowds. May squeezed his hand. "We can handle it. Few days and we'll be home." The matchmaking service had rented a hall for the gathering, a beautiful space with high ceilings and elegant decorations. Helena Morrison met them personally, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner May appreciated immediately. "Mr. and Mrs. Stone, thank you for coming. And this must be Grace." Grace, usually bold, suddenly shy, hid partially behind May's skirt. "She's not used to crowds," May explained. "Perfectly understandable." Helena crouched down to Grace's level. "I have a quiet room where you can wait while your parents speak. Would you like that? There are books and toys." Grace looked at May, who nodded permission. She went with Helena reluctantly, looking back twice to make sure her parents weren't leaving. Once Grace was settled, Helena showed Garrick and May the gathering. There were maybe 100 people, clients of the service, other success stories, matchmakers from across the country. The energy was overwhelming. "Your story has already generated significant interest," Helena said. "Many of our clients feel, as Mrs. Stone expressed in her original letter, that they are too much in some way. Your success gives them hope." "We're not special," May said. "We just found each other. That's exactly what makes it special. You found each other because you were honest about who you were. No pretense, no false promises. Just truth." Helena guided them toward a small stage. "That's what we want you to share, how you built something real from that foundation of honesty." When the time came to speak, Garrick felt his throat tighten with familiar anxiety. Public speaking had never been his strength. But then May took his hand and they walked onto that stage together, and he remembered they'd faced harder things than this. May spoke first, her voice carrying across the hall with surprising confidence. "My name is May Lynn Stone. 5 years ago, I answered an advertisement from a man I'd never met because it was the first honest thing I'd read in 2 years of searching. The ad didn't promise romance or luxury. It promised hard work, isolation, and honesty. And I was so tired of lies disguised as kindness that honesty felt revolutionary." People leaned forward, listening intently. "I'm not small. I'm not soft. I'm not what the world told me I should be. And I spent years trying to shrink myself to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. It didn't work. It just made me disappear." She paused. "Then I found a man who didn't need me to be smaller. He needed me to be exactly what I was, strong, capable, unwilling to break. And suddenly I wasn't too much, I was exactly enough." Garrick felt pride swell in his chest. This woman, his wife, speaking truth to a room full of strangers without apology or shame. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward, acutely aware of his size, his rough appearance, how out of place he looked in this elegant space. "I'm Garrick Stone. Before May, 5 women tried to marry me. All 5 left. They had different reasons, but they all came down to the same thing. I was too much of something. Too big, too quiet, too rough, too isolated. Whatever it was, I was too much of it." He could see people nodding, recognizing their own experiences in his words. "I accepted it. Figured some people aren't meant for partnership. But I was wrong. I wasn't wrong for partnership. I was wrong for those particular partnerships. The difference matters." He looked at May. When May came, she looked at everything those other women ran from and saw potential. She saw a life that could work instead of a life that was broken. And she was right. He took a breath, forcing himself to continue despite the discomfort. "We fight, we make mistakes, we don't fit some ideal of what marriage should be, but we fit each other. We built a world where both of us can exist fully. No shrinking, no hiding, no pretending to be less than we are. And that's what I'd tell anyone listening. You're not too much. You're just with the wrong people in the wrong place. Find the right place, the right person, and everything you were told was wrong becomes exactly right." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and others joined in, and suddenly the whole room was applauding. Garrick felt heat rise in his face, uncomfortable with the attention, but May squeezed his hand and he endured it. Afterward, people wanted to talk to them, men and women who'd been told they were too ambitious, too plain, too educated, too independent, too something. Each one carrying the weight of being told they didn't fit. A young woman with scars across her face approached May. "They told me no one would want me because of this," she said, gesturing to the scars, "that I should be grateful for any attention." "They were wrong," May said firmly. "Someone will want you not despite the scars, but because they're part of who you are, part of your story. The right person won't need you to be different." A man built like a bear, even larger than Garrick, spoke quietly. "I scare people. Can't help it. My size, my voice. I've tried to be gentler, smaller, somehow. Doesn't work." "Stop trying," Garrick said. "Find someone who isn't scared. They exist." One after another, they came. And Garrick and May stood there, offering the only thing they had to give, proof that finding the right fit was possible, that being too much for one world just meant you needed to build a different world. Helena found them hours later, Grace asleep in Garrick's arms. "Thank you," she said simply. "You've given more hope tonight than I could have provided in a year of counseling." "We just told the truth," May said. "The truth is powerful, especially when it comes from people who've lived it." Helena smiled. "Your story is already spreading. I suspect you'll receive more letters." They did. Over the following months, letters arrived through the trading post addressed to the Mountain Couple, or the Stone Family, or simply the ones who fit. People sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking them for proving it was possible. May answered each one personally, late at night by lamplight while Garrick and Grace slept. She wrote about the reality of their life, the hardships, the fights, the moments of doubt, but also about the rewards. About finding someone who didn't need you to be different. About building a life on your own terms. "You're becoming famous," Garrick teased one evening, watching her seal another letter. "I'm becoming helpful. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Fame is about being seen. This is about being useful." She set the letter aside. "Besides, it's anonymous. No one knows it's actually us." But people in town knew. Word had spread. Samuel mentioned it one day when they came for supplies. "Heard about your speech. People talking about it all the way down in the valley." "It wasn't a big deal," Garrick said. "It was to the people who heard it." Samuel handed over their order. "You two proved something important, that different isn't wrong, just different." The validation felt strange. Garrick had spent his whole life being told he was wrong in some fundamental way. Having people now say he was right, that his choices mattered, that his life had value as an example, it was disorienting. "You okay?" May asked on the ride home. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how we're the same people we've always been. Nothing changed except people's perception of us." Isn't that always how it works? We think we need to change to be accepted, but really we just need to find people who accept what already exists. Garrick thought about that. About the 5 women who'd left because he wasn't what they expected. About May, who'd stayed because he was exactly what she needed. About Grace, growing up knowing she didn't have to shrink herself to fit anyone's expectations. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it is." Winter came again. Grace's 6th winter on the mountain. She was reading now, devouring the books William Carter brought, asking questions about everything. She helped with chores, fed the chickens, collected eggs, even assisted with butchering, though she cried the first time they killed a chicken she'd named. "It's part of life here," May explained, holding Grace while she sobbed. "We take care of them, and they take care of us. That's the agreement." "I don't like it." "You don't have to like it, but you have to understand it." Grace eventually did, developing the same practical acceptance of frontier realities that her parents embodied. But she kept naming the chickens anyway, and Garrick suspected she always would. One night in deep winter, trapped by a blizzard, they sat around the fire while Grace read aloud from her fairy tale book. She stumbled over some words, but her determination to finish the story was pure May. "The end!" Grace announced, closing the book with satisfaction. "That was a good story." "It was," May agreed. "But not true," Grace added. "Real life isn't like that." "What's real life like?" Garrick asked, curious about her perspective. Grace thought about it seriously. "Real life is harder, but also better. Because in stories, everything works out because magic or luck. In real life, things work out because you make them work out. Like you and Mama. You made it work. May's eyes filled with tears. That's exactly right, little one. I'm going to find someone like that too. Someone I have to make it work with, not someone easy. Grace yawned. But not yet. I'm only 6. You have time, Garrick said, his voice rough with emotion. After Grace was asleep, May curled against Garrick in their loft. We did it, she whispered. Did what? Raised a person who understands that love is work, that nothing worthwhile is easy, that being yourself matters more than fitting in. She's 6. A lot of years left to mess that up. We won't. May sounded certain. We'll make mistakes, but we won't mess up what matters. We'll teach her that she's enough, that whoever she becomes is exactly who she should be. You sound sure. I am sure. Because that's what we teach every day just by existing, by being too much for everyone else and exactly right for each other. Spring brought shocking news. William Carter was retiring. He rode up to the cabin on a warm April morning, looking every one of his 68 years, and announced he was done. Body can't handle it anymore, he said, accepting tea from May. Time to settle somewhere, stop moving. Grace looked devastated. But who will bring me books? You'll have to come to town for them. I'm buying a little place there, going to open a shop, trading goods, supplies, the kind of things people need. He smiled at her. You can visit anytime. It won't be the same. No, but change happens. Can't stop it. Can only adapt to it. After he left, promising to send word when the shop opened, Garrick found May on the porch, looking at the mountains. You thinking about change too? He asked. Always. She leaned against the railing. Grace is growing. We're getting older. Carter's retiring. Nothing stays the same. That bother you? No, just makes me think about what comes next. What do you want to come next? May turned to look at him, the man she'd chosen 6 years ago based on an honest advertisement and a desperate hope. He'd gotten a few gray hairs, some new scars, but he was still fundamentally himself. Still strong, still quiet, still hers. More of this, she said. More years on this mountain with you, watching Grace grow into whoever she's going to be, building, improving, living fully. That's what I want too. Then that's what we'll have. They did have it, years of it. Grace grew into a young woman who was too tall, too strong, too unwilling to defer, and completely comfortable with all of it. She went to town sometimes, saw how other people lived, and always came back to the mountain. This is home, she'd say. Everything else is just visiting. More letters came, more people asking how they'd done it. May kept answering them, kept offering the same truth. Stop trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for you. Build your own space instead. Find people who don't need you to be smaller. Garrick watched his wife become a kind of unofficial counselor to people who didn't fit anywhere else. She never sought it out, never advertised it, but her reputation spread. The woman on the mountain who understood what it meant to be too much. You've become what you needed when you were younger, he told her one evening. Is that so bad? It's perfect. Years passed. Grace eventually left the mountain, not running away but choosing her own path. She found work in a city, using her strength and determination to build a life that fit her. She wrote regularly, came home when she could, and never once apologized for being who she was. You did that, Garrick told May after one of Grace's visits. Taught her she didn't need to shrink. We did that, May corrected, both of us. More years. Carter's shop became a gathering place for people who didn't quite fit, and he'd tell anyone who listened about the couple on Blackridge Mountain who'd proven that different wasn't wrong. Their story became local legend, then regional, then something larger. But on the mountain, they were just Garrick and May. Working, living, loving in the way that suited them. No pretense, no performance. Just two people who'd found each other against improbable odds and built something that lasted. They were old now, though neither would admit it. Garrick's joints ached in the morning, May's hands were gnarled with arthritis. But they still worked the land, still maintained the cabin, still lived the life they'd chosen. One evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the peaks, May asked the question that had been on her mind. Do you think we made a difference? All those letters, all those people we told our story to, did it matter? Garrick thought about the letters they still received occasionally. about the people who'd written to say they'd found the courage to be themselves, about the marriages that happened because someone read their story and realized they didn't have to settle for being tolerated when they could be understood. Yeah, he said, it mattered. How do you know? But because we mattered to each other. We saved each other from lives that didn't fit. If we helped even one other pair of people do the same, it mattered. May took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. I'd do it all again, every hard moment, every fight, every challenge, all of it. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been told they were too much finally finding the exact right amount of space. The mountain held them, as it always had, patient and eternal. Grace wrote that she was getting married, to a man she described as impossible and perfect, someone who matched her strength, challenged her mind, never asked her to be less. She wanted the wedding on the mountain, in the place that had taught her what real partnership looked like. Of course, May wrote back, this is where we prove it's possible. Of course it should happen here. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Grace stood tall in her simple dress, her soon-to-be husband looking at her like she was exactly what he'd been searching for. Garrick walked her down the aisle they'd created in the clearing, his daughter's hand in his. You ready? He asked. Completely. He's a good man. He's the right man. There's a difference. Garrick smiled. She'd learned well. The ceremony was brief and honest, much like his and May's had been years ago. When it was over and Grace was dancing with her new husband, May came to stand beside Garrick. We did something right, she said. We did a lot of things right. We did it our way. That's the only way that matters. They watched their daughter celebrate, surrounded by people who accepted her completely, married to someone who didn't need her to be different. It was everything they'd hoped for, and more. Later, after everyone had left and Grace and her husband had started their own journey, Garrick and May sat on their porch one last time. Tell me the story, May said. What story? Our story, how it started. Garrick smiled. They'd told this story dozens of times to others, but rarely to each other. A man named Garrick Stone lived alone on a mountain. 5 women had tried to love him, and 5 had failed. He thought he was meant to be alone forever. And then? May prompted. And then a woman named May Lynn answered his advertisement. She told him she was too big, too strong, too stubborn to fit anywhere else. She told him maybe what drove others away was exactly what she'd been searching for. And was she right? She was completely right. Garrick pulled May closer. They built a life that fit them both. They raised a daughter who never had to shrink. They proved that being too much for the wrong world just meant you needed to find the right world. Did they live happily ever after? They lived. Happily, most of the time. Challenged, always. Fully, completely, without apology or regret. May rested her head on his shoulder. That's better than any fairy tale. Yeah, Garrick agreed. It is. The mountain stood watch, as it had for decades. The cabin held them, as it always would. And 2 people who'd been told they were too much for the world they were given had built a world that was exactly enough for who they were. That was the story. Not of perfection, but of possibility. Not of easy love, but of earned partnership. Not of changing yourself to fit, but of finding someone who fit the truth of who you already were. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The sun set over Blackridge Mountain, painting the sky in colors that had no names, and Garrick and May Stone sat together in the home they'd built, in the life they'd chosen, surrounded by proof that sometimes the world gets it wrong and 2 impossible people can make something perfect anyway.